Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first read aloud of our new book, Moo. I just like saying the word. Sharon Creech has won the Newbery Award for one of her previous novels. She's a fantastic author and she writes in a slightly different method. So instead of filling the pages like a typical page, there's lots of empty space. It's almost written kind of poetic. This was a recommendation from one of you, and as I read what it was about, I became fascinated. So when 12-year-old Rena, her little brother Luke, and their parents moved to Maine, Rena doesn't know what to expect. She's ready for beaches, blueberries, and all the lobster she can eat. Instead, her parents volunteer her to work for an eccentric neighbor named Mrs. Falala, who has one very ornery cow named Zora. From the Newbery Medal winner, Sharon Creech, comes an uplifting story reminding us that if you're open to new experiences, life offers surprises. And I like that. If you're open to new experiences, life will offer you a surprise. I feel like sometimes we get stuck in our little comfort zone and we don't want to try some new stuff. Often though, when you do, it turns out for the better. And even if you don't enjoy something new, you've still had the experience and found things about yourself that could help you along the way. So, to trying new things, let's start Moo by Sharon Creech. And she wrote this for Karen, Mark, Pearl, and Nico, with special thanks to Pearl, Greta, and Audrey. Oh, and all the dedicated 4-H'ers at the Aldermere farm. That's kind of cool. So I wonder if she was a 4-H'er when she was younger. Or maybe she is now. Where are you going? Well, getting comfy? Alright. So it's not even, they don't have really chapters. They just kind of have bolded words. Instead of chapter 1 or chapter 2 or a title, it's just That Zora. So this is called That Zora. The truth is, she was ornery and stubborn, wouldn't listen to anybody, and selfish beyond selfish, and filthy, caked with mud and dust, and moody. You'd better watch it, or she'd knock you flat. That Zora I'm talking about, nobody wanted anything to do with her. Zora, the cow. And that's the whole first chapter. But first, before Zora. And you can kind of see how, instead of just writing left to right, straight down, kind of has a different little pattern to it. Very unique. But first, before Zora, I am Rena, 12 years and 2 months old, formerly of a big city, a city of monuments and people of many colors, a harlequin city of sights and noises, of museums and parks and music, and cockroaches and rats, and mosquitoes and crickets, and fireworks and traffic, and helicopters whooping overhead, and sirens screaming through the air. And that's how we lived for a time, me and my parents and brother, zooming on the subway, or creeping along in buses or cars into and around the city, trawling through the museums, ogling the dinosaurs and artifacts, ambling through the zoo, listening to the roars and screeches and scrabbles and warbles, staring at the lazy scrawls of the bored animals. Yes, for a time, that is how we lived. Drink out of my Moo cup. How you doing back there, my Moo partner? Good. Flight path. Then one day, we were stuck in traffic behind a tall gray bus spewing exhaust, with horns honking, people yelling, sirens wailing. On a day that was hotter than hot, my mother asked my father a question. A question can swirl your world. My parents had recently lost their jobs when the newspaper they worked for went out of business. We were on our way to drop my father off at another job interview. So, my mother said, "Do you still like reporting?" Not so much, my father admitted. Is that what you see yourself doing 10 years from now? because that's the flight path we're on. I was sitting in the back seat with my brother, Luke, a 7-year-old complexity. Sometimes he acted as if he were 2, and sometimes he acted as if he were 12. He was full of questions and energy and opinions, except when you wanted him to have any of those things at all. Luke was drawing with a black marker in the yellow notebook that was nearly always with him. He drew for hours and hours, contorted heroes, leaping and jumping and vaporizing, bizarre enemies with gaping mouths and sharp talons and horns, and complicated towns with alleys and bridges and dungeons. In the car, when Mom said, because that's the flight path we're on, Luke said, flight path? We're not in the airplane, you know. We're in a car. We're on a road. But I noticed that he was adding a runway and an airplane to his drawing. Drivers all around us were honking their horns like crazy, and the smells and the heat and the noise were pouring in the windows and squeezing us from all sides. It's so cool how she writes this too, because you can see the squeezing us from all sides is kind of squeezed down at the bottom. It's almost as if her words are showing what they're trying to say as they're saying it. Let's get out of here, my mother said. My father took his hands off the wheel and raised his palms to the sky. No, I mean out of this city, my mother said. Let's move. To Maine, I said. My parents turned and looked at me. Then they looked at each other. Then they looked at me again. Maine, they said. Of course. My parents had met in Maine many years ago, and when they spoke of Maine, their voices had the glint of sea and sky. In the car that day, Maine just popped out of my head. I hadn't expected them to take me seriously. I'm glad I didn't say Siberia. Which is how I came to meet Zora, though not quite so easily as it might sound, because first we had to give our landlords a month notice, and then we had to clear out all of our closets and cupboards and the dreaded storage garage. Then we had to lug some of that outside for a yard sale and the rest of the Salvation Army. And then we had to clean and watch as furniture renters tromp through our rooms, noting how, and the word small is small, noticing how small they were and how old and how dark, and it was embarrassing. And then there was the packing and the moving of the beds and the clothes and the books and the pots and the pans, and oh, it hurts my head to remember it, so let's just skip it. People said, my parents' friends said, are you crazy? And it gets cold in Maine, you know? And there's giant mosquitoes in Maine, and it gets cold in Maine, you know? And why? Why? But some others said they have lots of lobsters there, and great blueberries in Maine, and beautiful oceans and mountains, and great skiing, and lots of lobsters, lots of blueberries. Though it does get cold there, you know. Luke said, how did this happen, this moving thing? In his yellow notebook, Luke drew a winged dragon, scaled in gold, flying through the purple skies, grasping a house, a car, beds, tables, and chairs in its black talons. Why Maine? Why did I say Maine that day? Let's move to Maine. Because I'd read a book about it. 3 books, in fact. 2 were stories about a family's life on an island in Maine, and 1 was a book of photographs of rocky shores and lighthouses and vast oceans with breaking waves and high blue mountains. While I was reading those books and looking at those pictures, I was there already in my mind. I was clambering over rocks and wading in the ocean. I was hiking up a mountain and standing at the top, peering down the steep hillsides to the ocean beyond. I was there. Maine. It had such a sound to it, such a feel. And yet, I'd always lived in the city. I was full of buses and subways and traffic and tall buildings and crowds of people and city noises, honking and sirens and helicopter whirring and city smells, bakeries and car exhaust, hot dogs and coffee. Ooh, coffee. That's a good point. And city lights so bright. Was there room inside for the sights and sounds and smells of Maine? Would I know what to do and how to be in Maine? Friend withdrawal. So I guess they do kind of have chapter titles. Some of them start the actual chapter, and some of them just seem like chapter titles. Interesting. Friend withdrawal. The few friends I had didn't believe me when I told them we were moving to Maine. And then, when I convinced them, they acted excited about it, but as the days went by, I realized they were already forgetting me. It seemed they didn't want to waste friend effort on someone who was leaving town. One of them said, "You're going to get all Mainey." I wasn't sure what all Mainey meant, but whatever it was, they had decided it was undesirable. My parents had similar reactions from their friends. At first, people thought they were joking, and then they seemed excited and curious, but gradually they became less and less interested. My mother was hurt by that, but my father said maybe they're jealous or maybe they feel we're abandoning them. When Luke told his latest friend, Toonie, that we were moving to Maine and it was far away and he couldn't come over to her house anymore, she socked him on the nose and called him a stupid doofy head. When Luke told Dad about his encounter with Toonie, Dad said, "Well, who knows? Maybe we're all stupid doofy heads." Welcome to Maine. With that white chalky paint that newlyweds write, just married, on their cars, we wrote, "Moving to Maine." And all along the way, as cars and trucks passed us, people honked their horns and waved. Some rolled down their windows and shouted, "Maine!" And some scribbled signs and held them up for us to see. "Eat some lobster for me." And lobster is spelled Lobstah, because in Maine they talk a little different. Like, "Hey, let's have a lobster." Well, that's not how they... But you look up someone who's from Maine and listen to them talk. I can't do the voice, but they say lobster instead of lobster. It's like ahs instead of ers. Ooh, all right, I'm done embarrassing myself. Back to the story. "Eat some lobster for me." And "I love Maine," and "We're so jealous." But one guy's sign read, "It's cold there." At the border, we pulled over to pose beside the "Welcome to Maine" sign. People honked their horns like crazy, and they sped past us. Maine. In a small town, 3 hours up the coast, we parked by the post office, and we walked to a diner for lunch. And when we returned, there was a note on our windshield, "Welcome to Maine. We hope you like it here." The ocean was a block away. You could smell the salty air. People were walking their dogs and their kids, and the church bells were chiming and the sky was blue. Maine. Dad stepped in dog poop that oozed into every crevice of his running shoes. But still, Maine. We'd made it. All right, so we're going to leave off there. The next looks to be chapter that we're going to read is Harbor Town. So it probably describes a little bit about where they actually settled in Maine. It'll get a little bit more descriptive. So far, I really like this story. I like the writing style. I like where the story's going. I like how fast-paced everything seems to be. I hope you're enjoying this. We'll see what happens next time.